Hi everyone, and welcome to the Kathy Reisenwitz Show. I am Kathy Reisenwitz, and today I am joined by Mytheos Holt. He is a Young Voices advocate and policy analyst at the R Street Institute. Mytheos, how are you doing today?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good, excellent. So you wrote a piece pretty recently, it's yet to be published, but it'll be coming out soon, about the polling that Reason Magazine, along with Root, did of millennials and their political attitudes. And you make the case that in the polling there's some really good news for Republicans. Can you kind of tell us about what the good news is?
Yeah, sure. So, okay. Republicans are not completely screwed if you want to read this poll and look for good news for them. This poll actually has stuff that both sides could use to spin in their favor, although I think there's slightly more for Republicans. So let's start with the good news. 57% of millennials will not support larger government when you tie a larger government explicitly to tax increases on them. Millennials do not want their taxes to go up. This is a generation that, as I state in the piece many times, is economically desperate. The idea of having more money taken specifically out of their paychecks is a huge loser. It makes them lose faith in the idea of government, period. Even more important, 78% are concerned about debt and deficit spending. They think they are major problems. And this is the really big bit of good news. Usually when you talk about policies, I'll use it as a bit of a preface. When you talk about policies and you include trade-offs, people tend to favor them by less. For instance, the fact that millennials turn on big government when you mention that tax increases are involved. Well, when it comes to private retirement accounts, if you just ask, do you support private retirement accounts, 75% say yes. But
Wow.
Here's the really good news. When you ask, do you support private retirement accounts even if it decreases benefits for current seniors, when you include the trade-off, 51% still say yes. So you've got a majority in favor of private retirement accounts even if they have to throw Granny off a cliff. That's a huge rebuke to the policy legacy of Democrats going back to FDR. I mean, this is just not a generation.
It's a huge rebuke of Republican policies, though, as well. I mean, some weak attempts at inserting some market-based reforms into entitlement programs isn't exactly something that Republicans can be super proud of. So is it really good news for Republicans as they currently are, or is it just saying Republicans, Democrats, someone needs to get on this entitlement problem?
I mean, I think that the fact is that Republicans have been afraid to deal with the entitlement problem, not because Republicans are cowardly big government supporters, but because Republicans have viewed, and correctly for a long time, they have viewed entitlement programs as the third rail of American politics, which is to say that if you try and touch it, you're dead. Barry Goldwater campaigned on trying to reform entitlements, and Lyndon Baines Johnson ran an ad that isn't quite as infamous as the Daisy ad, but is still pretty bad, which just showed a couple of hands ripping a Medicare card in two. And that was all the ad was. It was just two hands ripping them in two, and it said, Barry Goldwater will cut your entitlements, vote Johnson, and we all know how that election turned out. And even, Ronald Reagan had to say, I don't want to undo the New Deal, I just want to undo the Great Society. But Republicans, I think, and certainly with the increasing libertarian bent that they've got, I think that every Republican in sort of the bottom of their cold, dark little hearts, they have all wanted to do something to rein in entitlements. And the fact is that entitlements are the biggest driver of debt and deficits right now. And literally, they are the biggest item on the federal budget, and they will only get bigger until the point where interest on the debt and entitlements consumes our entire spending budget. Republicans want to do something about this, I think, and having a mandate from the biggest generation since the baby boomers, in fact, a larger generation than the baby boomers, offsets that third rail effect, because if there's one generation that says, don't you touch our benefits, and another that says, we don't care if you touch their benefits, just make sure that this debt and deficit goes away, then, it's a wash. You can start pushing for policies that you'd want to push if you had the political will and political capital to do that, and millennials can give them that if they go the right way.
So another thing that you said was pretty essential for getting millennials on board with the Republican agenda would be to reform the social conservatism
Right.
aspect of the way that candidates run. Um, how do you do that? How do you appeal to millennials without alienating the olds?
Well, on some level, you have to alienate some of the old. But I think that there's a Republican candidate who recently came out who's running for Congress in Florida, David Jolly, who said that he was for gay marriage, and it took the press months to notice that this had happened. But when they finally did notice, there doesn't appear to have been any meaningful effect. If you look at Republicans who have who have run and have been either agnostic or completely in favor of gay marriage, it doesn't appear to be hurting them all that much, except, in deep red states. And deep red states are not going to vote for an Elizabeth Warren candidate. They're not going to vote for Hillary Clinton. At a certain point, you have to sort of look at those sorts of demographics and say, well, unless they're voting only on gay marriage or only on abortion or only on banning online porn, which I doubt that there's a massive ban online porn demographic that could swing an election. But the fact is that these demographics are dying, and even if you alienate the old, it may be worth it in terms of the amount of votes that you get that will last for much longer over the long term. And frankly, I think that on gay marriage, at least, the Republican Party is coming around on this. They're figuring out that you can't be a electorally viable national figure and continue to oppose gay marriage, or at bare minimum, you can't support banning it nationwide. The idea of supporting a federal marriage amendment is dead on arrival, I think, in the Republican Party and anywhere else.
I think that's true. I think we're definitely seeing a sea change in marijuana prohibition and gay marriage, but something that we're really not seeing that same sea change with would be immigration. And I think that's an area where the young and the old have a very stark divide and is going to be a serious problem demographically for the GOP, not just from a young-old perspective, but from the Hispanic demographic as a voting bloc is growing, and the GOP is obviously seen as really xenophobic and backwards with this demographic.
Right. Well, all right. I actually have some experience on the immigration front, in that back when I did work in comms, I did do some work on the immigration issue. And full disclosure, I was in favor of immigration reform. But that also means that I know some of the data on this. And the thing is that the problem for the GOP actually might not be as bad as you're making it out to be. It's not clear, for instance, whether the Republicans are just holding off on immigration until after the 2014 midterms, until after everybody's safe from being primaried for another 2 years. Because if you actually analyze the data, there are, except for David Bratt, who pretty much won against Eric Cantor because Eric Cantor had no constituent services and didn't talk to anyone in his district and was too busy running for speaker to run for his actual district. No candidate who has made amnesty an issue in the past few primaries has won. Chris McDaniel lost. He made amnesty an issue. The person who was trying to primary Richard Hanna in New York lost.
When you say made amnesty an issue,
I mean, they literally made they staked their election case against the guy they were primarying or the person they were primarying as this person is in favor of amnesty for illegal immigrants. They had a 0-for-0 record. And in fact, if you look at a poll that was done by Americans for a Conservative Direction, 80% of GOP primary voters are in favor of some kind of immigration reform. Now, what that looks like is another question. They may not be in favor of a path to citizenship or of doing comprehensive as opposed to piecemeal immigration reform. But the party has come around on this. The problem with immigration reform is that you have a very vocal, very, very loud, and frankly not representative group of people who want to talk about immigration and say amnesty, amnesty, amnesty. And what's really funny is that the people who are saying this are people who are actually bankrolled mostly by environmentalists. they're bankrolled by population control advocates who regard immigration as something that's going to contribute to Malthusian overpopulation of the United States, and will turn into a third world country and have, like, I don't know, tribal warfare like there is in Kenya or something. Like, the inner workings of these people's minds do not entirely make sense. But this is the thing. The GOP is not opposed to immigration reform. A very small, very increasingly insignificant minority is opposed to immigration reform, which just happens to have to be shown to lose several times before the political will is gotten. I think Boehner would like to move on that. I think that many people in the House, including Paul Ryan, would like to move on immigration reform. But there's simply too much at stake, and I don't think they want to jeopardize their chances of winning any votes with the elections coming up.
Well, that's some good news. There was also some good news regarding young people's views on Obamacare.
Yes, there was. So a very slight majority of them still support the Affordable Care Act, but if you actually look at the numbers and you compare it with partisanship, what that really means is a bare majority of them still like the president. Because if you actually ask them, do you support redistributive health care, which, as anybody who's studied the Affordable Care Act knows, is the core of it. It redistributes money from the young, healthy, and
poor,
yeah, to the old and wealthy, who are more expensive to insure for understandable reasons because they have more conditions. So it redistributes from people who can afford cheap insurance plans to people who have to pay for expensive insurance plans. And at the margins, this can help some poor older people, although frankly you didn't need that in the first place because frankly, and I can talk about this as well because I used to work for one of the main anti-Obamacare voices in the U.S. Senate. A lot of those people who were in, who would be most benefited by Obamacare could have gone into high-risk pools, which would have given them access to a minimal government-provided insurance plan or a state-provided insurance plan anyway. And in fact, Obamacare puts those people in a catch-22 because it says you have to be without insurance for a certain amount of time to qualify for subsidies. So what that means is people who have, conditions like heart disease or anything else have to literally go without insurance for a few months before they can get the thing that was supposed to give them insurance in the first place. So Obamacare literally is just terrible, and all it does is redistribute money from people who don't have it to people who do. But to get to your point, 55% oppose redistributive health care. And they get more and more hostile the more insured they are. The fact is that those who pay for their own insurance, nearly 6 in 10 oppose the idea of paying more to help the uninsured, paying more out of their own pocket to help the uninsured. And this is a pattern that continues with young people, is that the wealthier and the more self-sufficient they get, the less they support government programs that give out free things to other people.
Well, the most damning aspect of the whole Obamacare thing is, we're talking about the subsidies and if how big, doesn't work, then the subsidies are going to go away. But I wrote a piece recently about how the problems are really way more fundamental than the subsidies, because the entire premise of the system being solvent requires that a bunch of people who are currently not insured, who are cheap to insure and make a lot of money, right? So that's difficult. How are you both young and in America's economy and make a lot of money? That's a very small segment of the population. They all have to get on this bandwagon. Since the law has gone into effect, the percentage of uninsured has only gone down 3%. The vast majority of these new plans are old, sick, poor people. So, there is absolutely the idea that this is going to be solvent under the current scheme is just totally defies common sense.
I mean, yes, it really is a law that makes it. It's funny that they call it a health insurance act, because if you actually analyze how it behaves in practice, it does away entirely with the concept of insurance. Insurance says, you take a look at the amount of risk that someone poses, and you then set the rate that they have to pay you based on how much you think you're likely to have to pay out for their, maintain their health. This says you can't consider pre-existing conditions, which are one of the main drivers of risk,
Right.
which that in itself is silly. And the only way you can make that sustainable, because if you didn't have the mandate, which sets supposed to be a stiff penalty if you don't sign up, well, it's not that stiff. If you it says you have this penalty if you don't sign up, you need that to be stiff, because otherwise people will just wait until they get sick and then they'll sign up for insurance, and there's no way you can deny them. And that destroys the entire insurance industry right away. Now, your point is correct, I think, that the population that needs to sign up for this has very little incentive to sign up for plans that give them less, which is why the administration has had to outlaw plans that give them more for cheaper, or that give them more of what they need for cheaper, but that don't cover this massive grab bag of benefits that not everybody needs. I'm talking about, like, the classic men being forced to pay for mammograms element. Like, this is something that the administration is going to have a real problem with. And I will say this, it may be for the best if this subsidy case that just came up goes to the Supreme Court, because that may end up killing the law, period. And if that happens, then we can all go back to living in the insurance regime that wasn't completely screwed up by a law that nobody read before they passed it, and that gets like 1,000 pages of new regulations put through.
Well, I think that's where Republicans really get hammered, is that, sure, the system worked for middle-class people with full-time jobs. For a lot of people, it was really fucked up, and it was indeed actually really fucked up for everyone. It just hid the costs in such a way that we didn't so much notice, because our standard of living is so high for the middle class in America. But what it did is it codified an existing problem, which is that you've got two problems. First of all, you're absolutely right. What we have in America for health insurance is not health insurance, it's actually health care. And what it is it's cost pooling for care. Insurance is supposed to be, like you said, risk. It's not supposed to be, we're going to pool resources to pay for things that we expect to need. Every woman over 55 needs a mammogram. Most men over a certain age need prostate care. Like, these are things, pap smears, I know that they're coming up. And so the idea that we would cost pool for this routine shit is insane. It doesn't make sense. It bloats costs. And so not only does it codify all that regular care, but then what the ACA does is it says, here's a boatload of new regular care that we also now have to cost pool, which screws young people, because whereas on the individual market at one time a young person could, depending on their state, obtain something that looked like catastrophic care insurance, now they have to participate in cost pooling in order to be insured at all. So until Republicans can really grapple with the fact that we do not have, and have not had for decades, a health insurance option for people, we really lose a lot of credibility when we talk about reform.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the problem the GOP has, and I've written about this in various venues, including at the American Conservative, the problem the Republican Party has is there are a lot of good ideas that people have put forward to try and solve this problem. Ironically enough, I will not say many nice things about John McCain, but I will say this. He had the best damn healthcare plan in 2008. Because his idea was that what you do if you want to get everybody to have health insurance is you end the employer provided healthcare tax exemption and replace it with an individual tax exemption for healthcare, which would have enabled everybody to basically buy their own insurance. Now, why does this matter? Well, because the reason why health insurance companies are often real dicks to people is because they don't need to care about individual consumers. They need to care about giant employer consumers who, if Walmart is buying like however many thousands, hundreds of thousands of healthcare packages from you in bulk, why do you care about, random person over here who's paying $120 a month for their health insurance. You can afford to lose that little bit of profit. You can't afford to lose Walmart. So you can afford to be extremely generous with these massive corporate spenders, whereas if you made everybody spend only their own money, then suddenly every consumer matters. And losing a consumer starts to add up and become problematic because it can be a sign of market shifts. So that's one problem. And indeed, the GOP does have some good ideas. I mean, Tom Price from Georgia has come up with a couple things to try and solve this problem. There have been talks in the Senate about potential healthcare plans. My old boss, John Barrasso, had ideas for how to reform healthcare. But the GOP has not crystallized around any of these. It has not actually come up with what to replace Obamacare with. And you're right, Obamacare does take the worst elements of the old regime and just hammer them repeatedly. But the problem is the Democrats can say, well, we had a plan, what do you have? And, saying don't just do something, stand there is unfortunately not a viable message, much as I wish that it were.
Of course. All right, thank you so much. I feel better about my generation after talking to Mytheos. And where can people find your work?
Well, they can find it in a number of places. They can find me at the R Street Institute, which is rstreet.org, which they'll find me in the blog section. I should have a piece coming out shortly, I think, on actually something relevant to young people, which is higher education and the main drivers of student debt, especially whether going to an Ivy League school or a for-profit college is a higher driver of student debt. I won't spoil which one it is, but it may surprise you. And that will be coming out, I believe, possibly at the American Conservative. And other than that, just look for me at Young Voices and possibly also at occasionally Naked DC and sometimes Town Hall or the Daily Caller or the Blaze. So yeah, I'm all over the place.
Naked DC is super underrated. Highly recommended.
Yes, we really are. But it was fun. It's a great site, and I enjoyed covering CPAC for them, if nothing else. Because some of the things you see there.
I know, I went for the first time last year. It was an experience.
Yes.
All right, thank you so much for coming on, Mytheos. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Tune in every Monday, Wednesday, Friday for new videos. Please like, comment, share, subscribe.